Hey guys, welcome back to the Art of Server. So guess what Broadcom sent me? So this is a Supermicro server. I know, ironic, right? As many videos about Supermicro as I've done, I get no love from Supermicro, but Broadcom contacted me in, I think, mid-2023, and they told me they had been watching my videos, and I was really surprised and flattered that they said that they found some of my videos really helpful. And so that was great. And then they decided to send me one of their more modern RAID controllers. That's a 9560-16i card right there. And they sent it with this Supermicro server. So in this video today, we're just going to kind of do a overview of what this server is about and kind of talk about why we kind of need a server like this to be able to test out a card like that. Okay, so anyway, for full disclosure, you already know Broadcom sent me their RAID controller, and they sent me that controller in this server with some NVMe drives in here. I'll show you in a little bit, but this is not really a review video, or I'm not really endorsing any products. I'm just kind of taking a look and playing with some hardware. But any opinions that I express are purely my own. Broadcom has not stipulated that I have to say anything in particular about their stuff, and I don't get to keep this. This is going back to them once I'm kind of done with it, and so just want to make sure you guys know that. All right, so with that out of the way, this is a Supermicro A+1114S-WN10 RT. That's a mouthful. All right, so you can kind of see the model number right there. And this is primarily used as a kind of compute node, oftentimes for like a cloud type of environment where, you know, you just want some compute capacity and stuff like that. It's not really necessarily a great like high capacity storage server because you can just from the format. But this does have NVMe drive bays, and there's 10 of them. And so you could have some really fast storage in this machine. All right. And so the way Broadcom sent this to me, they have these NVMe drives. These are the Intel P4610. Now, granted, these are not the latest and greatest NVMe drives. Those are PCIe 3.0 NVMe drives. And there's only 4 of them. I got 2 here, and these other drive bays here are empty. Okay, so they just have blanks in them. And there's a reason why we only have 4, okay? But we'll get to that in a little bit here. All right, so anyway, more about this server. This is a AMD Epyc 7502P, which is underneath here. Underneath that heatsink is that AMD Epyc processor. It's a 32-core 64-thread machine, 180-watt TDP. Now, what makes this kind of special in combination with this stuff right here is that, of course, AMD Epyc provides 128 PCIe 4.0 PCI lanes, right? So it's kind of hard to get that many PCI lanes in a single socket machine on Intel architectures. So this is why this particular machine has this motherboard with this backplane. Now, before I get to tell you guys more about this backplane, because it's kind of a special thing too, let's just talk about the memory modules here. So you can see that there are 8 DIMMs. These are 16 gigabyte DIMMs, so I got a total of 128 gigabytes. Now, for testing some RAID controllers and stuff like that, we don't really need that much RAM, but these AMD Epycs are 8-channel architecture, so it is kind of optimal to at least have 8 DIMMs. And then, of course, there's also the second DIMM to each channel here. So you could, you know, double the number of DIMMs here, but, you know, at a minimum for optimal configuration, you want to have at least 8 DIMMs. All right, so, and these are DDR4 3200 ECC DIMMs. So just to point that out. The motherboard is a Supermicro H12SSW-NTR. And the thing that's kind of special about this motherboard are the connectors I'm going to try to show you right here. they're kind of behind. Let's see if I can. They're behind these cables here on the motherboard. So you can see there's a connector right there. There's another one right there. There's another there. And there's another there. And so they kind of look like SAS connectors, but they're not. They are SFF 8654 8-lane connectors. And there's 4 on this side. And then there's 4 more that you have cables plugged in right now over here. And those ports are connected directly to the PCIe lanes of this system. So they're 8 lanes each, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 here, 1, 2, 3, 4 there, and so there's a total of 8. That's 64 PCIe lanes directly connected to the processor. Now, why would you have such ports? Because of the NVMe drives here, because each of these NVMe drives requires 4 PCIe lanes. So with the 10 drive bays, that's 40 PCIe lanes you're going to need in order to drive all these NVMe drives. And so normally you would have cables connecting these ports from the motherboard to the backplane. And I'll talk more about the backplane in a second here, but that's why you need all these connectors in order to drive NVMe storage. So this motherboard is kind of optimized for NVMe storage. Now over here, you see 2 of these connectors are black and the other 2 are white. The 2 black ones, these 2 ports are actually kind of special in that they can support both SAS, or not SAS, SATA and NVMe. And so if they are connected to, if the cables here go to the backplane and that backplane is connected to an NVMe drive, they will support NVMe. If it's connected to a SATA device, then it will, I think, automatically connect those to a SATA controller on the motherboard. So you still have support for SATA through these 2 special ports. These other ones are just regular NVMe. Basically, they're connected directly to the PCI bus. So yeah, so that's what makes this motherboard special in combination with all these NVMe drives. So now let's talk a little bit about this backplane here, because this is kind of it's a hybrid backplane. So it's Supermicro BPN-SAS3-LB16A-N10. And that last bit, the -N10, is the NVMe support. So all 10 of these bays on this backplane can support NVMe, but it can also support SAS, which means it'll also support SATA if you have it connected to a SAS controller. All right, so yeah, let me kind of show you how this works. So there are these connectors here, and hopefully you can kind of see that. That is again, SFF 8654 8-lane connector. All right, and these larger connectors, the 8-lane connectors, are connected to the NVMe slots. Okay, so this is 8 lanes. Each one of these takes 4 lanes. So this stack, the 2 bays right here, are driven by that one connector. Now you'll also see, because this is a hybrid backplane, you'll see this smaller connector over here. That is also an SFF 8654, but it's a 4-lane connector instead of an 8-lane. So you'll see right next to it is an 8-lane. It's a little bit taller. It's actually about twice as big, basically. Okay, this is for driving SATA devices. Now there are four lanes in here, and those 4 lanes are connected to the 2 drive bays here and the 2 drive bays over here, because if you have a SAS or SATA connection, you only need 1 lane. It's only the NVMe that requires 4 lanes for the very high bandwidth that you can get from NVMe. And so anyway, this connector drives these 2. These 2 connector drives these 2 if you have NVMe in there. But if you have SATA, this one 4-lane connector will drive the SATA drives or SAS drives or whatever in these 4 bays. And same thing goes over here. That's another 8-lane connector. So there's nothing connected to that right now. So let's see, yeah, these right here, these bays, you can't really drive anything in there, or no NVMe at this point, because that's not connected. All right, and so here's another 4-lane connector that's for the SAS or SATA drives in these 4 bays. But then there's another 8-lane connector that's for the 2 NVMe drives here, and then there's another connector over here for the 2 NVMe drives there. Okay, and then there's also, I think, the 4-lane connector there to drive the last 2 drives here if you want to have SAS or SATA drives in those drive bays. So that's how that backplane works, by all those connections. And normally you would have those 8-lane connectors connected to these motherboard ports. So you have all the PCI lanes on the on this server motherboard connected to all these drive bays, so you could have all 10 NVMe drive bays working. And you'll notice that these black connectors, they split out into these 4 lanes, and that's because these ports can support SATA. And so if you plugged in some SATA drives in there, these ports can support that if you wanted to use more conventional drives and stuff like that. So anyway, that's how this system works. But Broadcom sent this to me, and you'll notice that's why these ports are vacant and not connected to the backplane, but instead you will notice that these 2 cables here are connected to this controller. And that's because that is the Broadcom 9560-16i controller, which is a tri-mode controller. So what does that mean? That means that it can support, you know, the traditional SAS and SATA and all that stuff. But the third mode, the tri part, is that it also supports NVMe drives. Now, of course, these connectors here are 8 lanes, so there's total of 16 lanes. And if you were connecting to SAS or SATA devices, you could connect up to 16 devices. But because NVMe requires 4 lanes per storage device, you can only connect 2 on one cable and 2 on, so there's a total of 4. And that's kind of why I only have 4 NVMe drives in this server. It's basically, they sent this to me in order to just test this card. So yeah. All right, so let me put the camera down because this thing's heavy. And let's pull out that card and take a look at it. All right, 1 second. All right, guys, so hopefully you can see the controller in here. I'm gonna pull this guy out. Unfortunately, this is like really cramped back here, and so I'm gonna have to pull the card out first without disconnecting the cables. All right, there we go. All right, so then I can disconnect the cables. So yeah, these are the newer 8-lane connectors here. The SFF 8654 8-lane connectors. There's also, like I showed you earlier, a 4-lane variant of this, but the wider one is a 8-lane connector. And so this has a total of 16 lanes here on this controller. So, all right, let me switch over to a overhead camera setup so we can kind of talk a little bit about this card here. All right, guys, so hopefully you get a better view of the controller here. So yeah, this is the 9560-16i because the 16 lane connectors back here, or the two 8-lane connectors. And now one thing that's a little strange to me, and this is obviously from Broadcom, so this must be a genuine card, but when you go online and you search for this card, the 9560-16i, I see a lot of pictures where the heatsink is like that size, where kind of this front half of the heatsink is missing. So I don't know what that is. Like, is this an engineering model, or if or if this is a new revision and the old revision had a smaller heatsink. Because the heatsink makes sense here, because what's going on here is, so you know, the controller chip, I don't know if you guys can see, I'm not going to take this card apart because, you know, I don't want to accidentally damage it or anything like that, because it's not mine. I got to send this back. Okay, so you can see there's a chip under there, and that's the main controller chip, and there's a gap in the middle here, and then you can see there's some really thick thermal pads right there. And I think what that's connected to is the cache chips, the memory chips that are over here. On the back, there's a few more here. I believe there's 6 chips over here, and then there's 3 more here for a total of 9. There's 8 gigabytes of cache, I believe, on this card. So I'm guessing those are gigabyte, you know, 1 gigabyte chips with a 1 for ECC, basically. So I think that's what it is. But yeah, anyway, if you search online for pictures of this 9560 card, for whatever reason, there's a lot of pictures of this with kind of a half-size heatsink. Yeah, so I don't know if this is a later revision or if maybe this is an earlier revision that they then decided, you know, they didn't need to cool the RAM so much and wanted to cut some costs. I don't know. But anyway, if you're wondering, if you were searching online and you saw this card and you're like, hey, this doesn't look like the same card I have in my hands right now, that's why. Like, yeah, I noticed the same thing. So anyway, this is a RAID controller. And this is the generation that first supports PCIe 4.0. And so when we get to the next video, when we do the performance tests and stuff like that, I'll show you that this actually can connect to PCIe 4.0. Okay, so that means that right here, this PCIe connector is 8 lanes, but it's PCIe 4.0 8 lanes. And so that gets you, I think, what, about 124 gigabits per second of bandwidth, right? Like that's double PCIe 3.0. PCIe 3.0 would have given you on 8 lanes about 62 gigabits of bandwidth. So this is 124 gigabits of bandwidth, which equates to about 15.5 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. So yeah, this was sorely needed. So if you guys have been following my channel and I've talked about some of the like SAS3008 cards and what was the other generation? The one just before this, the 9400 series, they were PCIe 3.0. And, you know, it was really, really easy. If you were using SAS3 SSDs or, you know, with the 9400 series, if you were using NVMe, you know, the performance capacity of those SSDs could easily overwhelm a PCIe 3.0 by 8, you know, connection here. And so this was sorely needed to be upgraded to a PCIe 4.0, or at least, you know, maybe have a wider PCI lane card. But a lot of servers tend to have more by 8 slots than by 16. And so this makes a lot of sense. This is the first generation of Broadcom cards that supports PCIe 4.0. And I think that's, you know, one of the highlights of this particular card. The previous generation, the 9400 series, you know, did support tri-mode and NVMe and all that stuff. But there were a couple of problems with that architecture, and one was, of course, the PCI bus, but also the IOPS capacity of the chip, I think, was limited to about 1 million IOPS. And this particular one, at least according to Broadcom specs, can support up to about 3 million IOPS. So this is like 3 times more performance in terms of IOPS, and then double the PCIe bandwidth. So there's a lot of progress made in this generation of card. Now, by the time I'm recording this video, I know that the 9600 series cards are now available, and I think they basically are roughly the same, except that the chip, I think, can support now 6 million IOPS. So they basically doubled the performance again in terms of IOPS. And they also support SAS4. So if you know, I don't know if there are really that many SAS4 devices out there right now. And frankly, I think the industry is moving more and more towards NVMe. So if you need high-speed storage, you're really going to be using NVMe, which means the optimal thing is connected directly to your PCI bus, not necessarily through a controller like this, because you're cramming all those PCI lanes through a controller chip and then through a PCI bus. Though we're going to test out some scenarios around that with that server in the next video. We'll see how that turns out, because I think we'll see some interesting results. We'll see, if this connecting the NVMe drives through this controller, is there a performance benefit or is there a disadvantage? Because you're cramming 16 of these lanes into this 8 lane here. Now, granted, those SSDs are not PCIe 4.0, so they're not going to require as much bandwidth coming through here to get through here. So maybe it's okay, but on the other hand, you're also going through this chip. So, is there a limitation? The 3 million IOPS on this chip, is that enough for, the 4 SSDs? So we're going to find out, but on the other hand, this card has cache on it, right? So does the cache compensate for some of that performance? Like if you're hitting the cache a lot, that might be faster than you would have if you were connecting, or if you were just hitting the drives directly on the PCI bus. So I don't know, we're gonna try that out and find out about this card. The controller chip of this generation and of this particular card is Broadcom SAS3916. So the 16 is for the 16 lanes in the back here, but it's basically the 3900 series. And the 3900 series is the RAID product line. And so if you're looking just for a pure HBA, it would be the 3800. But the 3800 and the 3900 series are basically from the same generation. They, have the PCIe 4.0. They've got the 3 million IOPS controller chip. It's just that the 3900 series are specifically meant for the RAID product lines. Okay, so yeah. Anyway, that's what this card is about. All right, let me turn it around to show you guys the back side. Okay, so right here, you can see instead of the, oh, that's upside down, isn't it? Okay. Okay, so my monitor for this is upside down. So yeah, you can see the logo there, Broadcom. And I'm pointing that out because, a lot of you guys contact me asking about, hey, how do I identify counterfeit cards? And by the way, guys, I spoke to Broadcom about that. They're very much aware of the problem. I don't know what they're going to do about it. The guys I spoke to were not, the legal department or anything. They were technical guys. So it's a real thing. They are aware about it. But one of the things that I always say is kind of a dead giveaway is when you find these boards and they don't have, the LSI logo in older generation stuff. But here, the Broadcom logo is definitely printed on the PCB. If you find cards that don't have that, then I'd be a little suspect. So if you want to see how this card performs with 4 NVMe drives in a variety of different configurations, stay tuned for the next video where I will run those benchmarks and show you the different types of configurations I'm going to do with that set of 4 NVMe drives. I'm going to be testing out. Now, this is a RAID controller, okay? And I know you guys are like, hey, aren't you all about HBAs and stuff like that? And yes, I am. But this is what they sent me, and I appreciate whatever they send me. So thank you guys at Broadcom for sending this hardware to me. But these cards also support a JBOD mode, and so we're gonna test that out as well. And I'm gonna kind of compare and contrast whether running RAID with single drive RAID zeros versus JBOD versus connecting those drives directly to the PCI bus on that AMD Epyc, and how that compares. Okay, so is it advantageous to leave this, for example, in RAID mode and run those drives as single drive RAID zeros or as JBOD drives, or how does that compare connecting the NVMe drives directly to the PCI bus? So we're going to be running some of those benchmarks and checking that out. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned for that video. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. If you like this video, make sure to give me that thumbs up. And if you're interested in this sort of stuff, consider subscribing to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss my videos. Also, if you want to support my channel, go check out my eBay store. I've got the greatest selection of pre-flashed IT mode HBA SAS controllers for your ZFS, TrueNAS, or Unraid builds. So go check out the link down in the video description. Alright, thank you very much for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.